All right, welcome back to another episode of Wellness Unplugged. This is a bit of an unconventional conversation that we're going to have and it's probably going to be an uncomfortable conversation. And from the title, I should probably have thrown a trigger warning in there or something like that. But October 10th was World Mental Health Day, and we're just a couple of days after that. And as someone who struggled with mental health before, I thought this would be a really powerful conversation to have, because Jeff is pretty open about discussing his past and his struggles. And he's also kind of a funny guy. I quite like him and want to keep him around as well. And I've been a guest on his podcast as well. So that was a bit of an unusual introduction. By the way, you might have just missed it, but Jeff was like sneaking it in there. Jeff has a unicorn coffee mug of all things. So Jeff, how about you tell us, first of all, how you came into possession of a mug that is a unicorn and where I could maybe acquire one?
I don't know where to acquire one, sadly, because Steve, I've named him, he's sustained some damage to his front end. I know eventually I will have to find a way to replace him. But I got him from a coworker. He bought everyone on the team mugs that kind of fit their personality, and I think he just knew I was the only person who would just walk around with it's actually on this side, it's a rainbow unicorn mug. So
okay.
Even better.
So you've had a bit of a story and a bit of a background. I think it's helpful before we dive into sort of the meat of the heart of this topic to share a little bit of the background here as well. I'm looking at some things you shared with me. You kind of have bounced through life and had a bit of you're, first of all, how old are you right now?
34.
34. So boy, you're getting close to middle age,
Well, the way I drink, I'm probably a little past it, honestly.
You've already had back surgery once, is that right?
Yes, at 25, I had back surgery.
25, you had back surgery. And what was that to fix?
I had a bulge or a herniated disc in my back, and it got so bad that my right leg just lost all feeling.
Okay.
So you can't really go through life for too long that way. Tried to rehab it and other stuff, but needed to get cut.
It's a bit awkward trying to walk with a numb leg.
Yeah, it doesn't work too well. And then I was walking with a cane, which is a great look for a 25-year-old if you're trying to be cool.
Well, you could have made it stylish though.
I could have, but I would have just made it worse.
Grab a top hat, get one of those like knob head canes or something like that, and
I could have found a unicorn cane maybe, and that would have probably worked.
That probably would have. So along the way, you've had some bumps and bruises and bounces, and kind of what we want to dive into here. It's kind of funny thinking about talking with a comedian about this topic, because maybe you didn't actually start out as a comedian. What actually, we'll take one step back and say, what made you dive into comedy as an idea or a career?
Frankly, it was after my last big battle with depression that I realized that the way I was living life was unsustainable, and I needed to find something that gave me a little more passion, a little more motivation to get up in the morning. And I knew I wasn't going to find it in my prior career choice. So I actually started writing a couple of screenplays. And while writing them, I was trying to make them dark comedies.
Okay.
But it was lacking comedy. So I ended up reaching out to a lot of comedians. And they all said, most comedy writers do stand up. They're not good at it. Maybe it's not a career for them, but they do it. And a lot of them also said, start a podcast because you'll have to talk. You'll have to find ways to be amusing. And that'll work its way into your writing. And I think it has helped quite a bit. So that's kind of how I stepped backwards into trying stand up in the first place.
So the comedy world is notoriously rough, I think, because maybe this it's kind of, maybe I think there's a couple of misconceptions around it. One that maybe it's not that difficult. You just got to get up there and tell a couple of jokes. But once you're on the stage holding a microphone and realizing these people want you to make them laugh, how did your first stand-up comedy episode go?
The very first time I went up at an actual comedy club. So there's open mics where you can, get people who tell poetry and stuff like that in a open venue. That's not really the same as going up on stage at a stand-up club with those lights. And
Right.
The very first thing was realizing, oh, I can't see anything. These lights have completely blinded me. I was a deer in headlights. And to make matters worse, there were open mics. A lot of times, the majority of people there are other comedians. There's not much audience on a lot of these nights. There was only 9 non-comedians there. 6 of them were my best friends and my family. Yeah, and they didn't laugh much at my jokes.
That's a bit of a rough start to a comedy career.
Yeah, I was talking to a comedian on my podcast a week or 2 ago, and he's like, "Yeah, that's the mistake everyone makes. You don't tell your friends and family that you're even going to try stand up until you've done it enough times that you're good at it."
Right. Yeah. So, and we've identified that comedy is one of the things that you brought into your life because you wanted to bring a little more color, a little more joy, just something you feel passionate about. Because you've had a couple of battles with depression, and kind of the topic we want to touch on is that you've come very close to suicide twice.
Yes.
And you kind of have an interesting, I want to say, backstory, because maybe there's these ideas around suicide that like there's certain causes and things, and there's certain ways to prevent it, and yours maybe doesn't follow the, for lack of a better term, the normal pattern. What kind of, how did it come about the first time?
The first time I was in college, and it just, I remember first feeling something right around New Year's, just something that I couldn't really put into words. I tried a few times to put it into words, and I just couldn't figure it out. And it just consumed me. And obviously what it was depression. There was no reason for me at that point. There was no logical reason. I was in college. I was actually getting paid to go to college because I had excess scholarships, and I was working for the Tampa Bay Rays, which was a dream job for a college student. Everything pointed to me having a great life. But I just couldn't get over the depression. And eventually it got to the point where I was still living with my parents, and I was alone in the house, and I was trying to figure out how to kill myself in a way that they didn't have to be super horrified. That makes any sense.
Right. Yeah. To sort of, make the discovery of what might have been a really tragic scene a little less traumatic, I guess, if we could put it that way.
Yeah, I didn't want them to have to clean up. Was the thing that just stuck in my head for some reason. That was the thing that just stuck in my head, is they shouldn't have to clean up my blood or anything.
Right. You highlighted, you mentioned something that I think that should be highlighted. There was no logical reason for you to be feeling this way. And I wonder if that in itself makes some people feel really, I don't want to say tortured, but it's like, there's no reason for me to feel like I don't understand why I'm feeling this. This isn't coming from a logical place. And I think it's important to understand that, because there's got to be a lot of misunderstandings. This is a conversation that most people are afraid to have. They're certainly afraid to have with someone who's maybe had these thoughts or ideas or intentions. What is it like for you? I think you've discussed this on your podcast before, which is why I think we can openly discuss this here. But what is it like for you, kind of when people are aware of this, but they're not really sure what to say? What would you say to someone?
You mean someone who has that kind of feeling?
Or someone who doesn't understand it and is like trying to figure out, well, what do you say to someone who might be in that situation, or, doesn't know how to bring the topic up?
The main thing is you really have to talk to somebody. It can be, for me, really the most effective thing for me was always talking to my mother. But it can be a therapist, obviously. It can be a friend. It can be, there's suicide prevention hotlines you can call. Um, just try to explain what you're feeling. And that by itself usually helped me a little bit, just being able to verbalize what is torturing inside of me.
Right. Yeah.
It's hard to do because when you're really in the throes of it, again, you're not really able to verbalize how it feels. It just, everything is bad.
And it probably comes from a different, like a part of the brain, maybe in like a place that's not really linguistic to sort of try to put words to it. So have you ever called the suicide prevention hotline? And if so, what was your experience with that?
I never have. Um, I strongly encourage anyone who has nowhere else to go to do that. If fortunately for me, I've got such a loving, supportive family that kind of was enough to talk to them. I have gone to therapy,
Yep.
honestly, and I encourage people to do that as well. I mean, even if they're not suicidal, I think it's helpful for most people.
We should normalize it.
Yeah, we should. And I'll be honest, I don't think I ever got much out of therapy, but that's because by the time I went there, I had kind of talked through my issues with myself, my older sister, my mother. So by the time I went there, it was almost performative, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
The therapists who I saw never actually knew my deepest, darkest secrets. They just knew kind of surface knowledge.
Right. So yeah, it was a bit of a perfunctory exercise. I just wanted to use the term perfunctory.
There you go. That's a good one.
Yeah. And so what was it like with your family? Like the first time you said you were in college, so this is more than a decade ago, I assume. Was your family aware that you had considered this, and did that change things with your family in terms of relationship?
Yeah, what happened was it took me so long to figure out how I was going to end my life that my parents had returned home by the time I had come to my conclusion. So I had to put it on hold. And I think it was that evening I broke down in tears and talked to both of them separately
Yeah.
about what I was feeling and what I was going through. And again, I was lucky enough to have them be so great. I mean, I didn't have a primary care doctor. My mom called hers, and I had an appointment the next day to go
Yeah.
see her to talk about next steps and whether I should go on antidepressants and all that kind of stuff. I realize not everyone has that, unfortunately.
Yeah. But so because I wonder if after they became aware that you had this experience, if they felt like they had to treat you differently, or what that sort of relationship was like.
I never felt treated any differently. I'm sure that unfortunately it's something that probably lingers in their mind. Not hopefully constantly, but I'm sure it's something that just kind of always lingers back there, as something that we hope it doesn't come back. And if it does, just please pray that he calls us, or calls
Right. Yeah.
somebody. Because I've been talked off the ledge a couple times. It's worked.
Yeah.
So,
And some people might say, and maybe you could sort of give your comment on this. Some people might say that either A, suicide is a cry for help, or suicide is a cry for attention. And how do you feel about it when you hear it expressed in that way? Do you think there's an element of truth to that, or do you think it's missing the mark?
I think it's mostly missing the mark. I think there is some element of truth. I think that most people do try to cry for help in their own way before they do it. Not everyone, unfortunately. But most times you hear of someone who was about to commit suicide and didn't. It was because they sent one weird text message, or they left one weird voicemail that was just, something was off, and whatever loved one listened to it. I know one guy I talked to, his insurance agent called him to at the last minute to tell him his insurance policy wouldn't pay because you needed to wait 24 months before your life insurance would cover suicide, and that stopped him.
Wow.
So it's always, again, unfortunately, it's not always that it happens, but I do think a lot of times there's a cry for help before you actually do it. But everyone has their own way of doing that. Mine, the second time was sending a weird text message to my mother, and I think to my older sister, and maybe all my siblings, about how much I loved them and appreciated them. And, if it was 2 or 3 in the morning, they'd be like, Jeffrey's drunk. What are we going to do?
Yeah. Right.
But it was the middle of the afternoon, and it was like, well, that doesn't seem right.
Right. That's not how sort of consistent with your pattern of behavior.
Right.
It's also been said, and I'd be curious of your thoughts on this, that for someone who is, experiencing thoughts of suicide, because suicide is, I think, seen as a type of escape. Like there's no other option to make whatever pain you're enduring end. That someone who is contemplating suicide, when they've made the decision to go through with it, that they might actually shift into a happier, more positive state. And that's actually an indication that they've come up with a plan. Was that your experience?
Oddly enough, I wouldn't say it was in my experience, because when it got to the point where suicide was the only option, I was at the bottom, and it was just a decision I was making. There wasn't a whole lot of, I'm going to do it on this day, this time. However, the second time, the only reason I did not, was talking to my mother, and she wasn't going to be able to talk me out of it, to be quite frank. But she said something, and it made me realize, if I go through with this right now, even though it is not her fault, she will blame herself for the rest of her life, because she was the one who could talk me off the ledge, so to speak, and she didn't.
Right.
And I thought, I'm going to just wait maybe a week, because this way she can't blame herself. I'll give her some time, because I want to end my own life. I don't want to ruin anyone else's. And there was kind of a sense of peace actually after that, because it was, well, I'm going to do it. I'm just waiting, because I can't do it right after I get off the phone with her.
Right.
And it worked. I mean,
so that's quite something, because it's like a timely phone call, like both times, because we would think that maybe like, is that enough, or is it that simple? But something about a human connection that makes us reconsider and maybe feel like there's something in the depths of this. Did you feel like, was there like a thread that you were clinging to, like, this is the thread that I'm clinging to, why I don't want to end this?
I never wanted to end my life. I just, at the time, felt the only way to stop the pain was to do that.
Right. Right. Yeah.
So it was always and I have 2 kids. So a lot of times people will think you don't want them growing up with their father having committed suicide, but in that mental state. And now, obviously, I'm thinking logically. I'm not in the middle of it. Obviously, I don't want that. But in the moment, I thought they're worse off having this around. Just, they'd be better without me. There's no logical argument to necessarily talk someone out of it, because there isn't really to me at least, I'm not a mental health professional, but there doesn't seem to be a logic behind depression to begin with. It's just a battle that some people have to face.
Yeah. And so then And of course, this is just a conversation. None of this is intended to be taken as anything more than that, an informational conversation, and maybe to help people have more understanding and insight into what it might be like for someone who is feeling this way. What would you say if someone like felt like someone close to them, a loved one or a friend, was feeling these sorts of tendencies? Is there something you could share with them that might, like, a way that might encourage them, or how could they reach out and maybe connect with a loved one or a friend that's considering suicide?
I think a lot of times it can be as simple as just checking in on them. Give them a phone call, and just ask how they're doing, and just go from there. One thing, Frank King is the name of a guy he's actually a comedian as well, who's done a bunch of TED Talks that you can find. And he had a list of things not to say to someone who tells you they're contemplating suicide. And I added a couple things. I got to talk to him on my podcast. I added a couple things to his list. But it's, don't say, well, think of how many people have it worse than you. Well, that doesn't make someone who's about to end their life feel better. That just makes them feel even worse. It makes it like, oh yeah, they have it worse than me and they can deal with it. So I'm clearly broken.
Right.
It's there's a lot of don't tell them that it's selfish, because again, you're insulting the person. That's not going to motivate them to make a positive decision for themselves. It's really, I would say, try to talk to them and try to get them to talk would be my personal advice. The more that they just talk, I think it just eventually something might click that, maybe I really don't want to do this. I need to, think of another solution here.
Yeah. And so, and we don't want this to all be like entirely heavy, but it is a really valuable and powerful discussion to be having. And I certainly want to acknowledge that I appreciate your willingness to be open and to share like this, because it's not an easy thing to do, but it's a part of who you are. And I think your willingness to share and have conversations like this through like your own podcast, like the Jeff Macolino Podcast as well, you are making a positive difference because of this. And I don't know if you set out with as intentions as noble as that, but it's actually pretty cool to think that here you are, someone who has grappled with this on more than one occasion and very nearly gone through with it, turning it around and now making a positive difference in other people's lives because of your willingness to discuss this. You're so down to earth, like you're a normal guy. And I think the average person would meet you in the street and would have no idea that you had any of this kind of in your experience.
Right.
And then, so in terms of what are some things that have helped you since then, that maybe have made life more bearable and that make you want to keep going? What are some things that have helped you?
One thing that was honestly vital was getting out of my my former profession. It was a job that. It was a career, I should say, because it wasn't necessarily a specific job. But I worked in insurance claims, and it was a job I got into, and it's not for everyone. I mean, that's the nicest way of saying it. But I got into it because I was just getting out of college. I got my girlfriend pregnant. I needed a job with benefits and with some money. That was where I went, and I was good. So I just, as I went on, I made more and more money, got promoted, and no matter what role I was in, it was just it was not a fun thing for me to do, and it always just had so much negativity in my head with it. So getting away from that was something. One of my best friends, actually, I was drinking, believe it or not, and talking to him one night, and I dealt with some horrific car accident stuff, and I would constantly go to sleep and have nightmares about my children dying in horrific circumstances, getting run over by cars and stuff. He's like, dude, you've got to get away from this because it's causing you stress that you probably wouldn't have if you didn't have to deal with it on a daily basis.
Yeah.
Some people can disassociate and do that job just fine, and that good for them. I never could.
Because you have a heart.
Yeah, and I have very vivid dreams, and it's rough when you're dreaming of your children suffering gruesome deaths constantly every night. And that's a weird thing that I still trying to figure out, but I can tell you it's gotten a lot better since I stopped doing it.
Yeah. So there's something really powerful even in that sometimes people feel like they don't have a choice. They have to stay in this situation where they're trapped, or they don't feel like there's kind of a way out. And you decided that, look, this is not worth it. And I mean, I've done something. I've never been suicidal. I don't mean that, but I mean that I've been in jobs where I'm like, this is crushing me. This is like killing my mental health. I hate this. I hate every day that I go to work and so on. And when I finally made the decision to step away, and I've done this more than once, like it's felt absolutely like fantastic. A huge burden has lifted. And so now you are pursuing one of your dreams. You decided to take a leap and go, I'm going to try and make a go of this. And you decided to try to make a go of like one of the hardest professions that are out there, and do it like during a time where live shows are not like all that easily possible. So, what's it been like? And have you had some phenomenal shows where you go, oh my gosh, this is why I do this?
Yes and no.
I mean, and we could put a caveat around phenomenal. I mean, we understand you don't quite yet have a Netflix special,
No, not quite yet. Maybe in 2022. That's
yeah.
Oddly enough, the second time I went to do stand up, I was going in. Luckily, I had no friends or family, and I was going in with a plan to be a little more like unpolished, to just try out some punchlines, and it's mostly comedians, so maybe I can get some advice. I show up there's only 3 comedians, and there are 40 or 50 people in the audience, which is unheard of for an open mic.
Yeah.
And I went up there. I'm sitting with doodling a new act to make a cohesive set for an actual audience, and listening back to it, I have it recorded. Listening back to it, I'm like, this is a little rough, but it killed with that audience. It was a great crowd, and I didn't have a whole lot of punchlines in the jokes. A lot of good premises that didn't really lead to where a joke should lead. So in hindsight, looking back, I'm like, that wasn't great, but boy, it was a great crowd. It made me feel great. And honestly, aside from stand up, podcasting has become super rewarding for me as well. Because sometimes you just get off recording an episode and just think, wow, that was awesome.
Yeah, and you get to have some pretty awesome and like meaningful conversations and fun conversations. That's really powerful. So then maybe I can ask this question. Like, I think you don't want to, like, suicide is not something you want to do. Do you ever fear that those feelings will come back, or do you just kind of go on with your life?
I hate to say it in this way, but I'm fairly certain they will come back at some point. I just hope that my goal now is to just be prepared for it a little bit better than this last time, because the first time it rolled around, I got past it and I thought it'll never happen again. The second time then really snuck up on me, so to speak. So quite honestly, from a lot of things that I've read and people I've talked to, depression, a lot of times for a lot of people, it can be a thing that it's going to come hit you no matter how much success you're having, no matter how happy you think you are, or no matter how happy you actually are.
Yeah.
So I don't like to think this way, but I think it's the healthiest thing. Is I just assume it's going to come back at some point in the future. And, think I'll be better protected from it next time it comes around because I'm a little more prepared to deal with it.
Yeah, and that kind of there's kind of two questions that I want to ask here, and I want to say them before they slip my mind. And one of them is going to be how do you prepare yourself? But or maybe it's more a comment I want to make before I go to that question, and that is there's this idea that that if we're happy or if our life is good, that there's no reason to be depressed. And again, that comes from a logical like reasoning or understanding, and it's not there isn't actually a connection. This idea that like if you have a good life, you shouldn't experience depression. It doesn't work like that. There's this I think huge misunderstanding because you've had times in your life where things were going very well. You had no reason to experience any of these things, and yet there they were present in your life, and you didn't ask for them. I think that's the other part is nobody asks for this. You know, you didn't decide that I thought this is a great way to get attention and make people like feel sorry for me or something. I don't think any of those thoughts entered your head.
No.
So kind of with that in mind, what do you feel like you can do to kind of prepare yourself for if this comes back? What are some steps you would take if you started feeling this coming back, and how might you know that it's coming back?
I think the depression part of it hits before the suicide part of it, if that makes sense.
Yes. Yep.
The depression really builds up, at least for me personally. It builds up over time. And a lot of times I tend to put too much stock into one thing and it's silly. It can be as silly as, oh, I hate my life. I'll kill myself, but I can't kill myself yet because the Saints are going to win the Super Bowl, and I can't die before that. Then the Saints lose, and all of a sudden your brain goes to, all right, well, there goes my last reason to stay alive. So you've got to be sure not to associate anything as your last reason for living, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. So don't attach to one single thing as the reason why you want to be here, but have multiple reasons why you want to stick around.
Right. And that honestly, that's an approach that I took. A lot of people would say the amount of alcohol I consume is extremely unhealthy for me, especially considering the depression and all that. But I've told this to so many people is I never drink because I'm happy. I never drink because I'm sad. You drink because you want to drink. But if you're feeling depressed, you shouldn't drink because you feel depressed, or you shouldn't drink because you're happy, because then you're associating it with these particular emotions. Just drink if you want to, but don't let it be because of that. So it's kind of a similar. I feel like that's the reason why I can drink so heavily, and if I want to stop, I stop. I don't have any sort of addiction to it, and I don't think I had that approach with depression necessarily, where don't attach it to your job, don't attach it to your football team, don't attach it to even a relationship that probably could be the worst thing for a lot of people.
Right. Yeah.
Just try to acknowledge the depression early on and talk about it before it builds to that point where you don't think there's any other escape from it.
Right. So there's kind of a because I know like I've lived with anxiety, and it's like I've heard it described as like a black dog, kind of in the background that just wanders in unannounced, and you don't know when it's going to show up, and that in itself can bother some people. And I can say thankfully I'm in a place where I don't really think about it anymore. I think if it shows up, I'm equipped to deal with it. I know how to deal with it now. It's not going to catch me. It might catch me by surprise, but I'm not going to be unprepared, is maybe a good way to put it. And so do you have any, could we call them like lifelines in place where if this starts happening, you reach out and say, hey, I want you to know, like, this is where I'm at. And do you have people in your life that you can communicate this to without judgment?
Yeah, fortunately. So, I have always, until really pretty recently, I've always kept all of this very secretive. Never wanted anyone to have any ideas that I had any mental health challenges. Recently, and maybe this is a morbid thing to think, but my outlet's always been my parents, and they're not old; they're in their 60s. They still, pray to God, still have many, many years ahead of them. But I did think at one point, like, I do need to have a bigger safety net, because God forbid, one of them passes away, or one of them, goes senile.
Yeah, yeah,
I need to be able to communicate better with, my siblings, with some of my closest friends. And I've had some really good discussions with a lot of people over the past year, about, and I've unloaded some heavy stuff on them, and they've all dealt with
stuff.
it. They've all dealt with it well, and I
Yeah.
know that if I get to that place ever again, I've got many people I can go talk to, and they'll receive me with open arms.
Yeah, and I think you just highlighted something else in terms of, it's like, build up your safety net, build it up and build up, like, safety net isn't made of one strand. It's made up of many strands. And so build it up. I think, with something like World Mental Health Day, these sorts of discussions are becoming a little bit more open, but I still think for the average person, they just don't even know how to approach it with somebody, because it is an uncomfortable topic that people don't want to talk about and are maybe scared to talk about. So if somebody wanted to ask you questions about this, and you're in a healthy place mentally right now, should they be afraid that like bringing up this topic of discussion could trigger you in any kind of way?
It wouldn't trigger me. I could see maybe some people, especially if they were really battling it and in the moment, maybe it could be something that makes them a little more uncomfortable. But I think, honestly, I think part of that protection for next time it comes around for me is talking about it with other people. And if they're experiencing it, one thing that can be tricky is if you talk to someone, if someone who's dealt with suicidal thoughts talks to someone who has never battled depression and doesn't have an understanding of it at all. Because we all have people in our lives who, Robin Williams commits suicide, and someone says, "What a selfish thing that is." And the people who have dealt with depression and suicidal thoughts are like, "Oh, is it that maybe I need to just be quiet, because if they're going to think
Right.
I'm
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
selfish person." And I understand their point of view on that. Honestly, I would say, in the whole, again, it's something to be sympathetic towards. It probably is selfish, because you're only thinking about yourself, which, that's fine. I mean,
But in that state of mind, like, how much capacity do you have for thinking of other people when you're at this place where you're experiencing so much pain that you're like,
you
yeah,
don't.
to try to convince you to think of someone else when your primal brain is going, is this ever going to end?
Yeah, and with me at least, and I assume with most people who deal with it, even if you think of your loved ones and you love them, you don't want to leave them. It always, with me, got in my mind that I'm a burden to them. They'd be better without me. They don't need me. I need them. So obviously, again, thinking about it from my current mental state, I think that's a horrible thing to think. Of course, my children need me. I'm a great father.
Yeah.
Of course, my parents need me alive. They don't, no parent should have to bury their child.
Yeah.
But again, in that state of mind, it doesn't come from a place of logic. I know, I know it's been said, but
Yeah,
um,
absolutely.
it's true.
Yeah. Well, I just want to, before we wrap up, I just want to reiterate how much I appreciate your willingness to have this conversation. And because it just helps people get a little bit more understanding of a topic that's really difficult, that nobody ever really wants to talk about, that is uncomfortable. And maybe this is one more strand in your safety net, that you're doing this now, that you're having these conversations, you're opening up about it. It's now not a shameful thing that needs to be hidden, because it's not something like, shame is usually connected to something maybe we've done that we feel like but you didn't ask for this. You don't want this. You don't want these things to be in your life. You don't want these thoughts to come back. You don't want them there. And so your willingness to have these conversations, to make connections with other people so they don't feel so alone in this, because maybe that's another part of it, is feeling incredibly alone in their struggles and not wanting to tell, what are they going to think? Well, you know what? I think you're a fabulous human being who's actually like you're not just a comedian and a drunk, as much as you like to joke about that. You actually might have a really powerful mission here, where your willingness to have these conversations will open up people's understanding around this, and will better be able to prevent this from happening in the future. So I, for one, salute you for doing this, and I love the fact that you're willing to have this conversation with me. And we didn't quite get a chance to get to the comedy aspect of that, but maybe what I can do is I'll show some people where they can find you. And actually, oops, wrong one. Let's try this one here. There we go. JeffMacolino.com, where he talks about less serious topics. And actually, he is a funny guy who's developing his comedy career. And yeah, man, where else can people find you?
Twitter, Instagram, I'm at Saint JMac. And then I do have the Jeff Macolino Podcast Facebook page as well. You can like me there, and you can message me through my website on any of the social medias or Facebook. If anyone ever wants to reach out to me, I'm still at the stage of my career where I'm still very accessible. So take advantage of it.
Yeah, you're not yet an international superstar sensation, even though that might be in your future. Yeah, man. I appreciate so much your willingness to have this conversation, especially just after World Mental Health Day. I think it's a really crucial one, and I think it's a really valuable one. And yeah, man, it's been an absolute pleasure.
Yeah, for me as well. I love that it's becoming more of a topic of discussion, and honestly, especially for men.
Yeah.
Men have an urge to never show weakness. And unfortunately, that can lead to dark places and battling things by ourselves.
So it doesn't need to be like that.
Yeah, no, it doesn't. And hopefully, my thing I've said before is, look, some people might think less of me, but if one person hears this and actually reaches out for help, I would be just blown away and just unbelievably grateful that I could impact even one person in a positive way.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks to everybody who tuned in. And thank you again to Jeff. Do be sure to check him out. Check out his podcast for some great conversations. There's funny ones, there's serious ones, there's deep ones. You'll even find a conversation with me on there. And
it's my mom's favorite episode.
Even better. That's so awesome. Thanks again, Jeff. We'll wrap up the live broadcast. Stay tuned for another one coming your way next week.